The dark cloud hanging over the Tennessee football program, I'll say cleared on Friday. The NCAA reached a verdict in the penalties. Yeah, they're far from sunshine for the Vols, though. This resolution dates back to 2020 when former head coach Jeremy Pruitt was fired for cause, launching an investigation into recruiting violations by Pruitt and his staff. Let's take a look at some of those penalties that he was issued. That includes a 6-year show cause for Pruitt and a 7-year show cause penalties for 7 other staff members. There is an $8 million fine, a loss of scholarships, recruiting visits, a whole lot more in here. But the one bright spot is no postseason ban. That was, of course, something that Pruitt himself was pushing for. So let's dig a little bit deeper on this issue with our Ryan Callahan of Go Vols 24/7. Ryan, the penalties will certainly hurt the wallet, but it seems like Tennessee's proactivity maybe lessened the blow here. How do you view this, while recognizing the hits, but also seeing that this can maybe be considered avoiding disaster to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think you don't want to look at it in just terms of wins and losses, but I think this is a win overall for Tennessee, considering what the downside could have been. I think the main objective for Tennessee once this whole process started was finding a way to avoid a postseason ban. I think there was a lot of confidence at different times that wasn't going to happen, a lot of optimism certainly throughout the process that wasn't going to happen. But just to know that's no longer on the table is the most important thing to Tennessee by far in this whole process. So they can now put those concerns aside for any recruits that might have had them. They can start to put this all behind them. And they've got some things that'll make them uncomfortable in some spots that we'll get into more in a minute. But in the grand scheme of things, all of this has to be considered a win for Tennessee because the severity of the violations that they were dealing with left open the possibility of a postseason ban, and now they can put that in the rearview mirror and say that's definitely not going to be an issue, and no one we're recruiting has to think about that.
In regards to recruiting, Ryan, a reduction of scholarships, a reduction of official visits and unofficial visits, they're reducing communication and evaluation periods as well. That's all been shortened. Of these various penalties, which one do you think will affect Tennessee the most in the short term?
Well, again, I think Tennessee will happily deal with any of these over the postseason ban, but I think each of them could cause a little bit of discomfort in different ways. If I had to pick just one, the scholarship reductions gets a lot of attention, obviously, but Tennessee's in a pretty good spot to absorb that when they have to lose 28 scholarships over a 5-year period. They've already reduced 16, and most people didn't even realize it was happening. They took 13 of those in year one under Josh Heupel because of all the players that left in the transfer portal. They just sort of absorbed that right out of the gate. So that'll be 2 or 3 scholarships fewer per year over the next few years. That's not a huge deal, especially in the transfer portal era when so many players are leaving each offseason. I don't think they'll feel that one very much. So I would say unofficial visits. I could see that one being a little bit of a headache at times. They have to lose 10 games where they can't host unofficial visitors. They've already done 2 of those over the past couple of years, but that's 8 more still. 4 of them have to be SEC games. So there's still plenty of non-marquee games on your schedule, but at some point that's going to be a conflict for maybe a player across the country or in Florida who could only make it in during his team's open date. At some point that's probably going to cause them to miss out on a visit here or there. So I would say that just because it is so hard sometimes to get players on campus from across the country.
So that's the short-term ramifications. There is, of course, a 5-year probationary period for the program. That's when the reductions and the penalties will take full effect. But beyond the 5-year span, how big of an impact will this have on the Vols' long-term recruiting?
I think very little as far as negative impact. I think in a lot of ways, I've kind of said this throughout the process, the investigation and the period of the uncertainty is the worst part of this. And probably most other schools who've been through this would tell you the same thing, that when you don't know, you don't have that final ruling or the certainty in the situation to tell recruits, that part's the worst because then your opponents get to fill in the blanks. They get to tell other players what the worst case scenario could be, and you have to spend a lot of time answering questions and dealing with that and trying to shoot that down when you don't still have certainty. Now they have some certainty. They can go take that to recruits, and anyone who has questions about it, they can assure them, no, there's no postseason ban. This scholarship reduction is not really going to impact the quality of players we're able to bring in over the next few years. So they're able to now point to something and say, this is what we're dealing with. We have a plan completely in place for how to handle it. And this isn't going to affect our ability to go forward and compete for championships. And that's the most important thing. So I don't think this hurts Tennessee's recruiting much at all. Again, it's something coaches will have to deal with here and there, but I don't think overall it's going to affect the level of players Tennessee is able to attract. And it certainly won't discourage any players from coming to Tennessee.
Josh Heupel and his staff have really turned things around within the program, and I think the expectations have been raised. The fan base now, I think, it looks at this program and what they're capable of a little bit differently than when he arrived. But what is the pulse, Ryan, of this fan base when they look at these penalties and these potential ramifications?
I think for fans, in some ways, it's a lot like the coaches. They're just glad to have this over with. Everyone's kind of been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 2 years, and now they can kind of finally put behind them the Jeremy Pruitt era and sort of the mess that Josh Heupel inherited more than 2 years ago. And it's already been kind of it's looked like a bright future for this program for the past year, especially. And now I think fans can sort of actually buy into that and know that there's not something else that's waiting around the corner that might present some issues at some point. They can now worry about just continuing to improve the talent level across the roster and competing with the teams at the top of the SEC where they think they're in that mix now. There shouldn't be anything really holding them back now with this out of the way.
Yeah, just good to have that resolution, move on, and look ahead. Ryan, thank you for breaking it all down for us. Be sure to read the great work from Ryan and the whole crew at Vols 24/7. It's an especially good time to lock into their coverage with, of course, SEC Media Days kicking off this week. Josh Heupel is set to speak on Thursday, and Vols 24/7 will be all over it.